Well, I kind of started out my life, I've had pretty much every privilege in the book, right? Like it took me a pretty long time to even engage with the concept of social justice, actually. Because for me, the world was designed for people who look like me and sound like me, who come from this background of privilege and not really questioning how our society works. And for a while, I was like totally down with that. I remember once I was in a meeting discussing the Christmas hero products for a big retailer. But on the list, we got to the £1 Christmas tree.
Okay.
And someone around the table said, the £1 Christmas tree, you can almost smell the exploitation. And everyone laughed. And those are the moments when you sort of part of you wants to laugh along because that's clearly the norm, and you know, but every time you do laugh along, like something in you dies, right? The flame gets turned down a little bit.
Jon Alexander is the co-founder and director of the New Citizenship Project. His mission is to transform the narrative of individuals and society from consumer to citizen. This work was sparked by a decade spent in advertising when he realised he was selling a story he didn't believe in, the consumer story. This realisation fueled him to utilise his skills, not just for selling to consumers, but to engage people in decisions, impacting their lives as citizens. This is why he authored the book, Citizens, with Ariane Conrad. Drawing upon his experience and extensive research, he holds a firm belief that humans are inherently collaborative, creative, and caring citizens. Jon's got a lot of lessons to share with you about contributing to society. Let's learn.
Rebecca Solnit wrote a book called Hope in the Dark, and she makes this distinction between optimism and hope. She says optimism is the belief that things will be all right no matter what we do, and pessimism is the belief that things will be rubbish no matter what we do. And she says the hope is different. Hope exists in the spaciousness of uncertainty, in the idea that we don't know what will happen, and in that uncertainty lies the room to act, and the fact that our action and our agency matters.
Jon, thank you so much for coming to the School of Social Justice. I'm really happy to have you here with us for the second ever series. I've been really looking forward to this because your work, your book, your organisation that you're leading, and the things that you're looking to do in the future are really exciting and have really had an impact across different countries and with different types of people. So lots to learn today and lots to share with our students at the School of Social Justice. So thank you so much for sitting down with us.
No worries, man. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. And I love how you brought your book as well.
Mate, I don't go anywhere without the book. You know, you've got to, once you get one of these things out of your head, you kind of, you take it everywhere you go.
That's it. And let's definitely talk about that. I mean, before we do, first off, tell us a bit about yourself and kind of like what you're up to and what your work's about.
Yeah, so I guess in a lot of ways, the best way to understand me, I think, is, I kind of started out my life, I've had pretty much every privilege in the book, right? Like I was a fairly posh school. I was a good athlete. I went to Cambridge and rowed for the university and did all of this stuff. I was like an under 23 and I'm not saying any of that to say like, look at me, I'm great. I'm actually saying it to say like, it took me a pretty long time to even engage with the concept of social justice, actually.
Interesting.
Like because for me, the world was designed for people who look like me and sound like me, for people who look like me and sound like me, right? and so it was kind of appallingly late, really, that I sort of woke up to that. And I, having only ever wanted to be an athlete, I kind of stumbled out of that when I wasn't quite good enough, and fell into the advertising industry originally.
Okay, advertising where it all started. Yeah. And first off, I just want to say I really appreciate your kind of openness and honesty there, because in a way that's a very different kind of genesis story to a lot of folk who've sat on that seat. And so you started your work as in advertising. So how does that lead you to where you are now?
Then what? So, the real genesis of the work I'm doing today, I remember my boss right at the beginning said to me, what you've got to remember is that the average consumer sees something like 3,000 commercial messages a day.
3,000, wow. Okay.
This was back in 2003, man. Like, I'm old, so that number has got higher. And he said, and your job is to cut through that. You've got to make yours the best.
Okay.
And for a while, I was actually like I say, like I come from this background of privilege and not really questioning how our society works. And for a while, I was like totally down with that, right? Like it really appealed to my competitive instinct and my kind of, and so I won some awards and all that sort of stuff. And it was only actually a couple of years in that I started to go, hang about, 3,000, like what you immediately did, like 3,000 a day, like
it's a lot of influence.
That's a lot of influence in a time when we understand now. I think the idea of like unconscious priming, the idea that like the language and the stories that we tell ourselves shape who we are and what we think. And basically, but over time, I came to sort of stare at that and start to ask the question, like, what are we doing to ourselves? And what we believe is possible, what relationships we're capable of having with one another, how we're capable of relating to our communities and our societies when we're surrounded by a story that tells us we're consumers 3,000 odd times a day.
Was there a moment when that happened, or was it, as you say, like a slow burn?
I mean, it was, there were moments.
Yeah.
Like I remember once I was in a meeting discussing the Christmas hero products for a big retailer.
Okay.
Firstly, the meeting was in like May, so that was a bit wrong. But we got to, on the list, we got to the £1 Christmas tree.
Okay.
And someone around the table said, the £1 Christmas tree, you can almost smell the exploitation. And everyone laughed.
Wow. That's deep. Yeah.
And those are the moments when, like, you sort of, as a young, like I was 24 or whatever, like maybe younger, but and you sort of want, part of you wants to laugh along because that's clearly the norm, and you know, but every time you do laugh along, like something in you dies, right? The flame gets turned down a little bit, and so yeah, so there were several moments like that, but ultimately I started a master's degree that was called Masters in Responsibility and Business Practice. It was really kind of 2 years of group therapy.
Okay, yeah. As most endeavours are when they last.
Right, exactly. And by the end of that, I was really articulating this question of like what are we doing to ourselves when we tell ourselves consumers constantly, and I actually went through a really dark time, like because I came to see working in advertising not as I had done at the beginning, like, which is really actually is like championing the values of the society that I believe, but I came to see it, I mean, even really as a kind of priesthood of a religion. Sometimes what I say to people is like, look, consumerism is a religion. Like what is Black Friday if it's not a religious festival? What is an airport departure lounge if it's not a temple of consumerism? Like how can you tell me how to understand these things if that's not, and so what is advertising if it's not actually a kind of priesthood of it? And to get
advertising
to that point,
is a priesthood.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like,
okay.
It's like, and let me be really clear on this. Like, I'm not saying that everyone who works in advertising is like a bad human or whatever. Yeah. Like I think I think the great difficulty of our time, and this is really the framework of ideas that I set out in the book, is like, I think we're living in a moment where the whole story of the role of the individual in society is collapsing and changing and moving. And so if I may just briefly, the kind of the core diagnosis really that I'm offering as a way of understanding the moment in time, which I think to me is the first step in really acting, is you kind of have to have an understanding of the territory.
Yeah.
But the way I understand it is I think we're in a place where there are most of the people in positions of power and influence in our society can only see two possible futures, can only see two stories of the individual. And the ones they can see are what I would call the subject story, the subject future, which is the authoritarian story. It's and they see that future rising, and it is rising. Because in times of uncertainty and chaos, like the authoritarian story, the simple, like, strong leader tells me what to do is an appealing thing. And the only other story they can see, the only other future they can see is what I call the consumer story. And this is what I mean when I talk about consumerism. I'm not just talking about stuff.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the idea that the story of the individual in society is the consumer. And for me, what that means is a story that says, actually, like, pursuing self-interest and appealing to self-interest is the truth of humanity. And that it is by doing that we will create the best society. That is the pathway. Because humans are inherently selfish, what we must do is appeal to self-interest. And the as I say, the diagnosis I've kind of come to is that it is those two. It is that sort of false dichotomy that is the problem. Because if we can only see those two stories, we just can't solve the problems of the time we're living in.
Why not?
So look, like, you can take maybe what I would say the three biggest challenges of our time, right? Loneliness, inequality, and climate and nature. You can't solve a crisis of loneliness from within a story that says that humans are independent, self-interested individuals. You can't solve a crisis of inequality from within a story that says that self-interest and a ladder that you climb is how a society should work. And you can't solve a climate and ecological crisis from within a story that says that we're separate from nature, and that says that accumulating material stuff is the path to happiness and well-being. You just can't. So. And equally, you're not going to solve them from within the subject story, which says that some strong leader will miraculously know how to fix everything, because that's also patently not true.
And
so what you need, sorry.
And I guess this is where the third concept of individuals comes in. And I'd love to hear that, particularly given that when you talk about social justice, we are talking about what happens in a society where there are a collection of individuals. And often what we're talking about here at the School of Social Justice is how people can contribute to people who are not themselves, right? What is your role and responsibilities to those around you? So what is, could you tell us a bit about...
Let's hit the third story and then let's stay there. So the third story, we're not subjects, we're not consumers. What humans are by nature, I think, and the story that's really building in this moment in time, and is what makes me so excited, is I think humans are by nature citizens. We are what I mean by that is I think we are collaborative, creative, caring creatures who can and want to shape the world for the better. And the strategy for how to achieve the best society that comes off the back of that. If you see people just as, like, in subject story, you see people as needing to be told what to do. In consumer story, you see the role of leadership as being to appeal to self-interest and try and sort of channel it. In the citizen story, what you're really going is, like, the strategy we need is everyone needs to be on the pitch. Like, all of us are smarter than any of us, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to tap into the energy and ideas and resources of everyone. And the role of leaders, what to me social justice means in that story isn't doing stuff for people or kind of, it's standing beside. It's like, it's building agency. Like the idea that people are the solutions to their own problems. Communities are the solutions to their own challenges. And the role of a leader or an organization or whatever is actually to invite people into that agency, not to sort of come in as the hero from outside. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, as a former community organizer from Citizens UK, the home of community organising in the United Kingdom, I learned so much from fellow organisers, and there is a deep held belief around this sense of rights and responsibilities, and this kind of flourishing of citizenship is necessary in order for real change to happen. So I'm on your side there for sure, and actually I think it's a real strong message to start off with, before we get into the methods of change, because just starting with that principle, that. What were the 3 C's you used? Caring, creative, collaborative. Was collaborative? Yeah.
Creative, caring, capable. I have to say it in the right order.
That's it, and that's I think a vision which, not only a vision but a description which I think is really necessary as a starting point. Before we get into methods, you kind of touched upon it kind of briefly, but can you just share? I mean, what are we talking about here when we talk about social justice to you, particularly given your background of, as you've described yourself, you didn't think about social justice much in your kind of younger years when you were a student, growing up, and being an athlete, and then you came into advertising and you started to see some of the realities of what this meant, and you saw some kind of things that worried you. What are we talking about here when you talk about social justice?
I mean, in all honesty, it's not language I use directly that much, but I do have quite a deeply held conception of it, I think, which is rooted in this idea of agency. Like for me, social justice is the idea that everyone should be an author of the society, right? Not just an inhabitant of it. Everyone should have the agency to meaningfully contribute to shaping it. Now that doesn't mean any one of us has control over it, and that in a sense is my reflection on my background and upbringing. I mean, I love my parents to bits. Don't take me wrong on that front, but as a fairly well off, tall, athletic, posh white guy. I've always felt like an author of the society to some extent, and I think social justice is the acceptance that actually, unless we are all authors of the society, none of us really are. And
just want to stay with that just very briefly. There's a lot of folk who have a view. Well, I'm not going to speak for other people, but and they're about to enter the room now. So there's a particular view that when it comes to sometimes really difficult problems of identity, of some of the things that are related to social justice, that certain people can't speak about them because of the background, which I disagree with. In the same way that somebody is born into poverty and I should not judge who they are, somebody might be born into wealth. And then the question is, what do you do with that wealth? I had the, shall I say privilege? I would say privilege to meet the monarchy, the king, the monarch, very recently. And I've been debating about what that means. But when I saw in front of me a person who was effectively having to kind of lead the whole nation, have the responsibility to uphold this institution, there's a lot of weight there. And I don't know if I'll keep this in the thing, but I actually felt sorry for him. Because it felt like he was the least free person I've ever met. And so in both, and there's many Disney films which kind of allude to Prince and the Pauper, what a good and bad. I mean, but do you have a message, particularly for people who might actually be of privilege, and they're like, well, I shouldn't get involved because people are saying they don't want me here. But in my view, I think it should be all folks interested in this. So do you have any thoughts on that kind of complex and complicated?
No, I totally agree. And it's something I think about a lot, because, not least because of my privilege, right? I guess where I land a lot. So I think not to get involved, not to be part of the conversation is actually as much of a kind of abrogation of the responsibility of privilege as to sort of as steaming in and solving it for people is a kind of is a domination of that agency. I think the role that I try and play, the thing that I think is really generative is that idea of being a facilitator and a convener and a space holder and a door. People who look and sound like me find it easier, and it's just the way it is, find it easier to be invited into the rooms where, the song in Hamilton, The Room Where It Happens.
No.
Oh man.
I'm still, I'm deciding before leaving England, do I watch it? But I decided not to because a friend said I can watch it on.
You can watch it in the States or whatever. You probably get a bigger experience. But there's a song in the musical Hamilton called The Room Where It Happens, which is about rooms of power, right? Where decisions are taken and bargains are made that shape. And it's basically what I'm saying really is that if you get invited into those rooms, or if you're born into those rooms, then the opportunity and the responsibility isn't to sort of turn away from them or to deny that you should be and like shut. It's to like open the freaking door and let everyone in, right? Like it's like throw it open behind you, pass the mic, open the door. Like that's the thing to do in my view.
I love that. So let's actually talk about you now opening those doors.
Yeah.
You know, as we said earlier on, you run an organization, you're an author, you're very active as a citizen. What are the methods of change that you've employed in your career? I mean, obviously with your advertising and branding experience too. Can you share almost as a starting point the methods you've used in almost like a list way, just to get us started off with?
God, there
you know, because people are thinking there's so many ways to get involved.
Yeah.
What are those ways?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. It depends how you think about it. I mean, there's a little sort of 3-step thing that I always say to people.
Okay.
And then maybe we can talk about like varieties of approach and methods. Maybe there's 4 steps. You've made me think there's 4 because I think the first one is this thing about choosing to believe in your fellow humans, right? Like it's choosing to see before you even start. You have to start from the place of going, the people around me are agents in this. I'm not doing it for them. I'm not doing it to them. I'm doing it with them. Like whatever I'm going to do, we do it together. And that has to start from that sense of like belief in humanity. And that has to be an active choice, especially in the world today, because it's not an easy one.
Yeah, there's a psychologist called Alfred Adler.
Yeah,
I've been reading a lot about what he has written, and this idea of comradeship.
Yeah,
very different from different types of relationships. But if you believe in a world of comrades rather than enemies, you just act differently. Yeah. And so as a starting point, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I mean, I particularly love at the moment, and she's become a friend over the last year, which is one of the weird experiences, a Turkish writer and activist called Ece Temelkuran.
Okay, tell us about her.
So Ece's, I mean, she has been a poet and novelist and journalist in Turkey for years, and then wrote a book called How to Lose a Country, The 7 Steps from Democracy to Dictatorship, about 5-6 years ago, about the rise of Erdogan in Turkey. And basically, like, he essentially tried to have her killed, and she sort of had to leave the country. And when she was on the tour for the book, people would ask her, like, where's the hope? Like, show me the light at the end of the tunnel. This is a really dark way of seeing. And what she ended up saying to them, and I was with her just the other day, and she reminded me of this. She said, in the aftermath of the earthquakes and so on, what she said was, hope is too fragile a thing. And like, what you have, hope, does it make a difference? Like, if you have hope, do you act differently if you don't have it? And what she says instead is that what you have to have, and you have to choose to have, is faith in and love for humanity. And you have to choose to have those things in spite of evidence sometimes. And because only if you have those things can you actually build and bring together and act. And in the face of, and with those things, it doesn't even matter what else is around, because you know you have something to start from and build with. And you're not doing it instrumentally because there's some light at the end of the tunnel to feel hopeful for. You're doing it because you know you're doing it from love of the other in this moment, right?
Yeah.
And she would put it much more powerfully than me. You should have her on.
I'd love to have her on. I think we can learn a lot from her, and I think that bit about hope is really important, particularly when people are facing really tough times. And just the Erdogan and earthquake examples of what's been happening in Turkey.
It's crazy.
If you're able to have hope and those kinds of lived experience, then, I mean, I heard someone recently say, I think it was in a TV series, so not necessarily in the book or of an activist, but the idea that hope dies last, or the last thing that dies is hope. And in a way, like, that often is something which people cling on to because that's all we have. But without it, you can't move forward.
Yeah, and this is why I think there are some semantics in what Ece is saying, because in a way she's sort of saying forget hope, but I think what she means by faith in and love for humanity is something like what a lot of us mean by hope. There's another. We shouldn't stay too long in this movie because I know your guys want some practicals, but there is a lovely another way of looking at this. Rebecca Solnit wrote a book called Hope in the Dark, and she makes this distinction between optimism and hope. She says optimism is the belief that things will be all right no matter what we do. And pessimism is the belief that things will be rubbish no matter what we do. And she says the hope is different. Hope exists in the spaciousness of uncertainty, in the idea that we don't know what will happen, and in that uncertainty lies the room to act, and the fact that our action and our agency matters. So that's all like that mindset of like regardless actually of what the outcome is, I have agency and I can act, and critically the others around me have agency and they can act, and I will, and if I work with them, if we work together, we have even greater agency.
And actually, you kind of in a way say, I mean, that is one of the most practical things. I mean, that's the starting point.
Right.
So okay, and then what are you had 4.
So step 1 is that.
Yeah.
And step 2 is then like I talk about it as choosing home.
Choosing home.
Home.
Okay. I'm doing that currently. I'm back in the Philippines, deciding whether or not the UK is home forever. What? So go on. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, so lovely. Again, like I'm being a bit of a book list guy, but there's
I love this. Yeah.
Guy called Stephen Jenkinson wrote a lot about home, the idea of home from living, studying with indigenous peoples, and particularly at moments of death, and thinking about ideas of rootedness and this kind of thing. And he has this lovely thing. He says being at home is not a feeling; it's a skill. It's something you have to keep. You have to work at. You have to keep doing. And what I mean when I say choosing home is really what's the domain you're going to commit to as the space of your agency.
Fascinating. That's a great definition. Yeah.
Right.
Can you say that again? Home is
what's the domain? What's the space you're going to commit to as the sort of space of your agency?
I really like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you and that could be, is it the UK or is it the Philippines, right? It could be is it my neighborhood or is it my country in terms of what scale are you going to work at? It could be, is it my workplace or my neighborhood, because you might decide that you're going to work for change you don't have to be a citizen, you don't have to immediately from day one be a citizen of everywhere all at once, but choosing home, choosing a domain in which you are going to explore and build your agency with others. And that takes me to the what's now the third step. Sorry, go on.
Because I think that's really interesting, where it's both geographic and location, but also in a way craft and issue.
Right.
So, School of Social Justice, we're focused on education and social justice.
Right.
That can take place anywhere in the world.
Right.
Because there's social injustices wherever you are. But also then it's the geography of, the kind of problems that are happening in Venezuela are very different from the kind of problems that are happening in, a place like Venice, or I'm trying to think of other places that begin with V. But in a way, that's something which we haven't really discussed yet so far, is where do you do your activism?
Right.
And I think that's a really important point for our students to really consider. Is it in your neighborhood? Is it in your city? Is it in your, is it on your online group? Is it on your, based on your identity? There's different domains and places in which you can do your activism and your social justice.
And it all is valuable, right? So, a couple of the most different possible examples.
Okay.
One of my favourite stories is of the 11 McKinsey consultants who originally sat down together and wrote an open letter to the McKinsey partners.
Okay.
Saying we need to think about our company's stance in relation to fossil fuels. And that open letter, first there were 11 of them, now over 1,100 McKinsey consultants have signed that letter. And it's shaking the whole beast, right? That's choosing a domain.
I never would have thought about a McKinsey-led revolution, but there you go. But I think, jokes aside, that is exactly a perfect example of where change can happen in the most surprising places. And even if you're working for the Big Four, in a Big Four, if you're working for a big financial institution, it doesn't mean you don't have agency. Because actually some people think, okay, if you're poor, if you don't have a house, you don't have agency. But sometimes people who are in very high paid positions don't have agency because they've got so many pressures from outside.
They feel trapped.
There you go. Golden handcuffs is some people describe it as. Okay.
And then on the other extreme, you sort of alluded to, one of the stories I tell in the book is of my now friend Kennedy Adede, who's who basically born in with the worst of circumstances. Like he watched his best mate get stoned to death as a street kid in a slum of Nairobi in Kenya at age 13. Right, like this is, and Ken decided the domain was literally the couple of streets that he lived on, and said we don't have. There's this amazing quote from him. He said something like we don't need the money of the white people to keep our streets clean. We don't need the money of the white people to stop our sisters from being raped. We don't, and just started to organize in that one tiny place. And then build the muscle, build the agency with friends and
take destiny into his own.
Man. And now and don't get me wrong. What I'm not saying is that everyone can do it and circumstances are nothing. It cannot be like that. That it takes such extraordinary efforts, and that's a big part of what social justice is. But it is when people say that sometimes the response to some of my stuff is this is a nice thing the middle class people can do. It's is it? Right? This is deep and human, and people are doing it everywhere in spite of the conditions of their lives. Yeah. What we have to do is make sure it's because of the conditions of their lives and with the support of those conditions rather than in spite of them.
And if anything that history can attest to is the fact that it's always actually, not always, often been people who have kind of just said, look, no, I'm fed up. This can't continue.
Right.
And often those people have come from nothing and just organised.
Right.
And even from Jesus' times with him, you could say he was a community organiser to many other types of community organisers, right? If you work together with other people who have similar interests and problems, change can happen.
Find your own. And this is that's basically the next step for me. So if it's choose faith, choose to believe in humanity, choose home, the next step is find the others, right? It's who else? Because you're not going to be the only one. And if you can either find where they're already organising, find where there's something already sprouting, or if you can't find anything, put the bat signal up and draw them in. Right? It's
I'll put the School of Social Justice logo up there. If you want to help out,
silhouette in the sky, man. But the reason and only then the next step is decide what to do together. It's
and that's interesting because that's the fourth final step. Because some people just start at number 4. But so go on, tell us about the action bit.
So the idea is essentially if you our deepest agency, our greatest agency is together, right? The word citizen actually was one of the moments in the research for the book where I was like, boom.
Go on.
The literal meaning of the word citizen is together people.
Together people. I thought it was people of a city.
See, this is fascinating.
So
right?
that's wrong.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So and you know why we think that
is person.
There's some other words that have come into relation. So city and denizen and these sorts of things. But the actual in Latin actually is so. Calm down. So I get excited about this, but it's what we think is that citizen comes from city. Basically, because it's the longer word and that's how derivations work, that's the assumption. And therefore, citizenship becomes a kind of geographical idea. It becomes a legal status as well. Right? Rather than, but actually, when you dig into the etymology, what you find is that the word citizen originally comes from Latin co plus vir, so together plus man, together people. And that becomes the Latin word civis, which means citizen. And then civitas, which is a city, actually literally translates as the citizenry. So a city,
Civitas, okay.
a city is actually like, if you sort of literally translate, a city is just a place where people are together. The civilization is like the art and practice of doing life together. Like, and when you start to see it in those terms, one of the ways I actually talk about it in the book is like the idea that we have to reclaim the word citizen in this way.
How so?
Because it can get reduced to a legal status or a passport you hold, and that is I would argue
alive.
it's so much more. But when you let it become that's actually the consumerization of citizenship, right? Like when you let it become just a legal status, when you let it become a passport. I mean, look, like there are countries in the world where you can buy citizenship, but actually, I really love
business,
right?
Yeah.
But when
there's a whole industry behind that.
There's a whole industry and some dark stuff, and also at the other extreme, people who are stateless and therefore denied citizenship. There's this horrible language of non-citizen, right? But actually, when you step into this language and this understanding of citizen as meaning together people, then you go. I really love. I've become another like new friend over the last years. A guy called Baratunde Thurston in the States. You're going to love this.
Yeah, tell us about it.
So Baratunde, if you do one thing after listening to this, it won't be to read my book. It'll be go and listen to there's a podcast called How to Citizen.
Okay.
And so what Baratunde does is he uses the word citizen as a verb.
Yeah.
And he's like
citizen.
To citizen. And he's like it's a practice. It's not a status. It's not a noun. It's a practice. And when you see it like that, I was talking in like this language of like this metaphor that citizenship is a muscle you build, like, and what follows from that as well is citizenship is a muscle we build, and this is why like finding the others comes before deciding what to do, or at least at the same time as, and is like a proposition that we buy into together and own together because we've got to build that muscle together.
Yeah.
One of my favourite stories is in Grimsby in northeast England, which is like and we're talking about literally the street that was named the worst street in the town that was named the worst town. Like county lines, gangs. There was a dead dog in a bathtub on this street. Like all of that stuff, and. This guy, Billy, who's become another guy who's become a mate. He went to a councillor meeting one evening, and he wasn't going to go because he was like, these just end up with being with everyone moaning, and the councillor saying they're going to fix it for us, and they're not going to, and
very frustrating.
And his friend said our mums would have gone, so he felt he had to go.
Okay.
And then he got so frustrated in this meeting that he stood up and he said, "Look, let's just go and clean up a street tomorrow." Like let's do like who's going to come with me? Let's that's and so that is a moment. It's not like he just went, what should we do, and then decided to go. But he did go, let's do the first thing together. And that organisation. So what that has become. This was like I think it was only like 4 or 5 years ago. I need to check, but now there is an organisation called East Marsh United.
East Marsh United.
Yeah, so the little neighbourhood's called the East Marsh, and they've got a fortnightly magazine called The Proud East Martian. Okay. They've got a 6 monthly arts festival, and they've just at the end of last year they successfully closed a £500,000 community share offer, which is enough money in Grimsby to buy 10 houses, refit them using good local jobs, and then let them out as a social landlord. And that all comes from deciding to get. There's a lovely.
We started with someone standing up in a meeting, but also all the frustration that built up, and just literally stepping out and doing something with people. I think what I love about the whole clean up the street example is that part of the reason why we set up the School of Social Justice is a lot of content, media, podcasts out there which talks about how to improve yourself, which is very important. Less so about how you can contribute to society. Right. And we felt we kind of want to at least try and see if we can do anything on that. Jordan Peterson is one of those figures who has influenced so many people. And of course, politically, wherever you stand, one of the interesting ideas he says is, before you can do anything, clean up your bed, tidy your bed, do your bed, right? It starts off at home, basically, is the metaphor, right? Fix your bed, before you can try and solve any other problems, fix it, sort out your bed. And this way, it's kind of like, well, okay, with our community, let's just start off with cleaning up the streets. And then now it's led to 10 homes being...
and they've got an ambition of 100 homes by the end of this year. And note the use of the word home, not the word house, actually, which is, again, like consumer versus citizen. And look, I'm no Jordan Peterson fan. I think some of his stuff is like super... But I think there is, as you say, there is a truth in that. Similarly, there's Billy in Grimsby talks a bit about what's called broken windows theory, which is this idea that it's actually two ideas packaged together, and one of them is very helpful and the other, I think, is quite dangerous. The one that's very helpful is the insight that when a place looks like shit, people are going to behave like shit because there's nothing to cherish and be proud of. Where that theory tends to get taken and where the Petersons of this world take it is therefore like crack down hard on the people who do the minor damage. And when you do that, like when you extend that logic there, you get to a place of racialization, you get to a place of blame, and you get to and where I think we need to come at this from is much more, like I say, it's a place of the cultivation of agency, of starting from the belief in people, not starting from a place of suspicion and trying to find blame. It's like the distinction when you're looking for agency versus when you're looking for blame is huge.
Yeah, really important to bear in mind. And I'm just very aware of time.
Yeah, man. I get carried away.
No, it's amazing. There's a lot there. I'm just wondering, can you go until 1:45? So
yeah.
Okay, so we've got 7 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about, we talked about some examples of kind of stories of people you've met. Sounds like you made a lot of friends and good comrades around your travels and your research. Let's talk a bit about the skills now that people need. You've clearly got a very strong knack of communication. Like you can communicate ideas, you can tell stories, you can build narratives. I assume a lot of that was through education, but also your time in advertising, but also just the experience of writing a book. And also you've written a book which takes a very specific type of activity on a regular basis to write books. Sitting down, thinking, writing, editing, going through the whole process of getting an agent, publisher. You worked with somebody to write the book, Ariane, whose name is there. Tell us about what you think are the skills necessary to achieve social justice.
I think, and thank you, by the way, for calling out Ariana. She's my sort of writing collaborator. She's a brilliant human being and has worked on an awful lot of books with people that you would really like and would be great for this thing. In terms of the skills of social justice, I think the thing I really want to emphasize is actually like facilitation.
Yeah, that was the word you used. That was really interesting. Can you tell us a bit more about what facilitation means to you?
It means so much to me. It means the skills of bringing people together. It's like a convening as part of facilitation. I think it means, I think there's a real skill within this that's about articulating questions rather than answers. That's a part of facilitation. Well, so if you put forward the answer, so let's put it in the case of like I don't know, of Billy and Grimsby, and you go, the answer is we have to, like from day one, you stand up and you go, we have to own our own houses. We have to own our own homes. People in the East Marsh have to own them. And it's not wrong. Yeah. But it's like how do we ever? And instead, where it essentially came from was like, how can we work together to build our pride in this place?
So that very particular type of question changes the framing of how you see what's in front of you.
Because what you're articulating, when you articulate a question, you create space for people to hold that question with you and come up with their own answers. Like, and that's what facilitation really is for me. It's like the art of like, it all comes back to that thing about how do we build agency together? Like that, how can we in this moment in time when so many feel so powerless, and that's not just the people in material poverty, although that's a huge part of it, but it's the people who've got their kids in private school and who feel they have no time. It's the king. Like there's so much felt powerlessness actually. It's like, how can we? And the only way we're actually going to be able to face these challenges, the world we've got, is by finding agency together. Like I say, everyone on the pitch. So that's why, like this, the facilitator's mindset and skill sets. Like, how do you hold questions and answers? But how do you understand the kind of temperature of a room and a group of people? How do you pay attention to like what people need in order to be in the room? There's a lovely phrase, again, I'm throwing more names and books, but a new friend called Cormac Russell wrote a lovely book called Rekindling Democracy. And Cormac talks about like moving at the speed of trust. Like, so how do you know, how do you know what that speed is? Like the art of facilitation is so deep and rich, and I'm like super imperfect, right? And
as we all are,
right. But if you know that that's what you're trying to do, then like the thing I want to, if I could do one thing,
go on.
If I could do one, it would be to make every elected politician go through deep facilitation training.
I can see how that's very radical. And tell us why. Why is that the one thing?
Because I think there is so much power in those spaces still. There was a moment that I think was probably the biggest missed opportunity in this country, in the UK, in decades, in the first wave of COVID, when so remember right at the beginning, there was this the government message was stay home, protect the NHS, like. And it was like, and that is what I would call a subject story message. It was like, we little people will look after you. You just
very paternal,
And what was happening was citizening, mutual aid groups, street WhatsApp groups. Remember the NHS First Responder Scheme was set up, and the website could take a traffic of 250,000 volunteers in 3 weeks, and 750,000 signed up in 36 hours or something. Crushed it.
Amazing.
Like we were doing it.
Yeah.
And then when the subject story fell apart, the consumer story was reimposed. It became stay alert. It was eat out to help out, remember? Literally equating the citizen instinct of helping out with the act of consumption and eating out. But what might have happened if we had facilitators? If we had... I think, like, and there's in the book I tell the full story of what happened in Taiwan, where basically they essentially crowdsourced the entire national response. They defined it with 3 principles: fast, fun, and fair.
Cool.
They set up a phone line where any citizen could ring in with ideas for how the country's response could be better. There's a story of a 6-year-old boy ringing up and saying, the kids in my class don't want to wear their face masks because they're pink and they think that they're girly. So you need to do something to make pink face masks cool, and I think you should work with the baseball team. Okay. 3 days later, they had half the Taiwanese baseball team, the little boy and the president, on the press conference in their pink face masks. Cool. That is facilitator mindset. Imagine if here the message hadn't changed from stay home to stay alert, it had changed from stay home to let's do this. Like we've seen what you're all doing. I love
that phrase, let's do this. We use that a lot at school.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, what a place to end then. Because that's it for me, is like, that is a facilitator's phrase.
Let's do this. Thank you so much, John, for coming here, for joining us, having this conversation. I have a feeling this is the first of many, because I've got so many other questions that have come up, and I can't wait to see what you do next. I can't wait to see if you write another book, if what else you go and do. All I know is that people should definitely read your book and read about the stories, but also follow the work you're doing just more generally. And what I will say is that having had this conversation, I've learned a lot. I feel challenged to think about citizenry and citizenship in a different way, which is interesting because citizenship is something I've been thinking about for years, but now I've got this fresh take from yourself, so I appreciate you doing that. But also I think the bit about doing citizenship is a really important way
Yeah.
for us to think as we try and learn how to make a difference. So thank you for your contribution, your lessons, and your masterclass. And yeah, we'll be sure to support you from afar. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, man.
Cheers.
This educational content is absolutely free. Why? Because our vision is a world where anybody, no matter their background, can learn how to make a difference. To keep going, we need your help. Can you become our next patron? Can you help us reach 2,500 patrons? I really hope so. Whatever the case, hope you learned something today, and sending you peace and love. Let's keep learning.